Hello everyone and welcome to this TELedvisors webinar. Today we're looking at learning technologists, what they actually do. What do they know? What do they do? What's the difference between edtechs and learning designers? How do we work together? How do we find the best people for the job? Today we're joined by, well, myself, Colin Simpson, Kym Schutz from University of Adelaide, Joe Hayes from Monash University, and Elaine Huber from the University of Sydney. So I will hand over now to Kym Schutz. So Kym Schutz has been an educational technologist with the University of Adelaide for 18 months. Previously, he has worked in TAFE SA as an e-learning manager, and many years ago was a secondary maths and computer studies teacher. Over to you, Kym.
Thank you. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. I can see my microphone going up and down, so that's a good start. So Colin's introduced me, and what I thought I'd do is talk about, I'll just get onto my first slide, talk about what I do and what I do with relevance to the learning designers. My role here is actually called an educational technologist. The learning designers here, there's a number of, it's about 7 or 8 of them, and the educational technology role was only established about 18 months ago, and we've now got a second one, so we've seen it as a growing need for it. I'm mostly going to talk about what I actually do, but what was, I had to think about how to present this first slide today was about classifying technologies as future technologies or as technologies in use elsewhere that we at the university are not using. Core technologies, which is our learning management system, and we use Canvas here. Echo 360 is our video system, which is integrated with Canvas, and I've put Zoom in, although Zoom we've got a full license, but it's not heavily used other than for meetings and stuff, so it is available to students, but I'm not sure how much it gets used. And then I've put in old technologies, and so what I just thought I'd do initially is talk about how in my role, I guess the difference in the scale of work that I do in comparison to the learning designers. So I'll just talk through this slide now, and that is that with future technologies, that's things that are just on the horizon, not really in use elsewhere, although sometimes they might be. My role is to investigate, look at how to use them, be ready for it when it comes, and make recommendations. So, for example, I came across something at the Canvas conference last year. It was a technology where it actually captured your handwriting and put it into the system, the learning management system, converted it as something called, I think it was called Inkerts. And so I went into an evaluation, investigation, and as Colin mentioned, research what it does and how it might be useful in the university. I wrote an evaluation page or two, did a fair bit of time in looking into how it might be useful, and then I make a recommendation to our management, and that gets seen as something we should pursue, or we have an agile system here, and it actually sometimes gets put into what's called cold storage, which means not that we're going to reject it, but we might look at it in maybe 6 months to a year's time. So that's future technologies. The second one is to investigate technologies that are in use elsewhere, so another university in particular, but schools and I guess TAFEs, where I've come from. What are they using that we might find useful? So again, I investigate, talk to people, try and get an initial expertise, and I think that's important for most of these. You really have to have an educational or learning technologist. I think you have to have that ability to learn something very quickly, even if it's quite technical, and pass it on to others. So evaluation, trial, pilot, and I distinguish between trial and pilot here in the sense that I see a trial as where it's looking at what it does and how it works, whereas a pilot is actually to try it in the organisation or the university. just trying to think of some of the technologies in use elsewhere. I guess one I'd known about, for example, here that we're looking at right now is H5P, for example. And I noticed, I think Uni here in South Australia, they'd already been using it. And I think that's where I guess I stumbled across the fact that they'd had it integrated or working within their system. And so even though I'd known about it for a long time, I guess it's following up and seeing how they're using it. And I think we had a speaker come in from Uni and talk about how they were using it. So we're doing a pilot with that now. And then the next phase is the core technologies. I see our core technologies as our learning management system and associated systems such as our video system, which is Echo 360. Zoom is licensed, therefore I see it as core. The other core technologies across email and stuff, I guess, that's the IT department have said this is what is standard across the university, as opposed to technologies that might be used in pockets. And I'll talk about that quickly in my third slide. And then there's old technology. So what happens if something goes out of date or becomes unsupported? And I guess most of you here know about like stuff like Flash or Flash-based tools. We had something called what was it? PowerPoint. Oh, can't think of the word of it now. There's a PowerPoint multimedia system that got just tossed out by Microsoft about a year ago. I can't remember what it was, but we just suddenly had to say, no, that's old and we've got to move on to something else. So how do I work with the learning designers? Well, the learning designers here at our university are probably less technical, and they tend to work across the whole course design. That I'm sure is different in different organisations, but what I would say is that when it comes to future technologies, the learning designers need to have an awareness of what's coming up in the future, but not really do too much investigation or know how something works. Technologies in use elsewhere, again, you would think the learning designers would have a good awareness. Where they become involved is if we decide, yeah, we're going to go ahead and look at something like H5P, then they would be fairly heavily involved in the pilot. And I'll just go on to the next slide in a moment and explain how that works. The core technologies, they need to have expertise, which means I would assume learning designers have pretty good technical expertise, but they do what I guess I'd call learning design, and they provide elbow support to academics in terms quite often of using our learning management system and things like that. Just back onto core technologies, some of the things I'll sometimes do are look at solutions with elbow support. So it might be something a bit out there with the learning management system and someone wants a new plug-in. Someone's got their microphone on there. There might be a new plug-in that we need to look at, and I would investigate and find out, oh, you could have already done that within the existing core systems or learning management system. Just going on quickly, how am I going for time? I'm trying to make this fairly quick. This slide you can keep for later, but I've actually just developed this and I won't talk too much about it, but I thought I would quickly mention how the role of the educational technologist here fits in with the whole with other staff across the university, teaching academics, our support staff, learning resource developers. And I guess the main thing here is that I've used large or smallness size of the rectangles to show how much involvement or work there is in the field. So the academics, for example, we would expect are that larger green area under core technology shows they should be spending a lot of time and have proficiency in course development with the learning management system. Same with our My Uni support and learning designers. I've actually put myself as having expertise, but maybe trying to spend a bit less time on core technologies, whereas a bit more time on future technologies or technologies used elsewhere. So that slide, probably I won't talk about that now, and I'll move on just to the final slide because I'm just trying to keep 10 minutes here. How am I going there, Colin, for time?
You're good. You're good. Take all the time you need.
Okay. I'll just move on to the last screen. Actually, I'll just talk about this for a little bit more. So, the interesting way that we work here, I guess, is that all of the staff you see on the screen at the moment, out of all of those, the educational technologists, the learning designers, the My Uni support, and the learning resource developers are all in the pretty well in the same unit here. We're all part of one unit, and that's come about fairly recently. The teaching academics obviously are out in the faculties, so we are fairly centralised here, and we sit in the same area, but I know other universities that may well be completely different, especially with learning designers. But one of the things that we are trying to encourage is that when the learning designers, sometimes they'll tend to work with academics in terms of pedagogy and learning design in larger groups, whereas quite often I would work one-on-one. It's not very often where I've had the opportunity to meet more than one or two academics at a time, other than what we have called communities of practice, or if there happens to be a workshop that I've run and I'll get 3, 4, 5, and I guess I've had up to 10 in workshops. But we've seen a need for more of how we actually support that, and I guess that whole thing of workshops to provide support in a 1 hour or 2 hour session is something that I think there could be more of personally, where new technology comes in, let's do a face-to-face on it, because I know the academics often don't feel as though they've got the time to I think if you try and do it online, they tend not to come. I guess that's what I'm saying. If you get them face to face, you've got a nice targeted 1 or 2 hours, and it seems to work pretty well. Just go on to the next slide, and that is what about the widely used non-core technologies? This is I've left the slide sort of the same in terms of who people are, but what I consider to be non-core technologies with us is stuff that isn't really it's not so much supported by the university or our IT in terms of risk or security or data. So, but they are still widely used. For example, I've got here video such as YouTube or Vimeo. What do we do about that? Advanced interactives like Storyline or Captivate, or something similar, those authoring interactive software. Who looks after that sort of stuff, or is there a need for it? Next one I've called programmed interactives, which we've got a group here, Adelaide X. They do a lot of work with programming what we call interactives that can be embedded or placed into our learning management system. Then I've got simple interactives, which is what I've classified here as H5P. And the last one, which is probably deserves more attention, is social media tools such as Facebook, Mentimeter, and those sorts of tools. And this is just an example of stuff I've been looking at and investigating recently. And under the Educational Technologist, for all of those, I'd say there's a fair bit of expertise required. The reason I put programmed interactives of awareness mainly is because I'm not a Python or a JavaScript type programmer. So I've said, well, for me, that's just being aware. Something like the teaching academics, I've just said, well, video, they want to create it and reuse it. I would hope that for advanced interactives, which are the stuff that I'd like to see more of personally, I really enjoy doing those, the simulations that you can do with Storyline and Captivate. Hopefully the teaching academics and the learning designers, they would be able to design and storyboard those interactives, and then they would go to the learning resource developer to be able to develop it. But along the way there, or before those learning resource developers are able to do that, sometimes they would, in our organisation, come to me and I'd help them with sometimes a bit out there ideas in terms of how you do those simulations. And that's because I happen to have, I guess educational technologists in general, would tend to have that authoring skill. I go back a long way with authoring with Authorware from many years ago, if people have ever heard of that. But that authoring skill, I think it's going to be around a while. So just finally, yeah, simple interactives, H5P is something where, again, on this screen, academics design and storyboard, learning designers would design and storyboard. We have learning resource developers would develop them. However, with something like H5P, I see more of possibly the development being done by the academics. So we're continually looking for tools that are, or technologies that are easier to use for the academics. And that quite often is, for those of you that know the difference between something like Storyline and H5P, you'd probably agree that H5P in the long run would be a lot easier for academics to do something quick and efficiently, whereas Storyline, there's a lot of distracting tools in there that can make it a lot harder to do. And Facebook, I happen to be studying my master's in education at the moment, and I'm doing a topic on online formal communities through Uni SA here externally, and I'm studying social media tools, and I've really seen how that's an area that, yeah, the educational technology needs to be on top of how to use it. There's all sorts of other issues there that learning designers need to be aware of it. So that's pretty lit for me. I've actually, I'm pretty sure that's it, and I guess I'd open to any questions now. I've only got, yeah, if Colin or someone wants to moderate that, I'm happy with that. So I'm happy to finish there.
Thank you very much, Kym. I might actually, so the final section of this webinar is actually an open discussion. So I'm thinking to maximise the time that we've got there, I might ask everyone to save questions until the end. So if everyone wants to just show their appreciation to Kym in the chat, and I'll ask Joe to maybe just share his presentation. And yeah, look, that I think, yeah, the way that we all work together is something that we've really not given enough time to or enough thought to. And I think there's many more discussions to be had about this, but I really liked the approach that you took to mapping out the relationships and who does what in the whole process. And I think, you know, there's room for discussion about, do these people know this, and maybe, you know, there needs to be a little bit more cross-skilling or something. But I think that was a really fantastic presentation. Thanks, Kym.
No worries, thank you.